Hello and welcome to Inside Music, episode number 108. My name is James Shotwell, and this is my show coming to you currently from my office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a home office, as many of you know, so it's pretty much a normal day around here. I'm fine, the two fat cats are asleep, and there's nothing really to complain about. On this week's episode of the show, I'm chatting with Jesse Cannon, a career music producer and author of two books geared towards helping artists accelerate their careers. The first was dedicated to getting more fans, but the second, the recently released Processing Creativity, focuses on the craft of songwriting. Jesse is one of the smartest guys I know, and we had a great conversation around all things music, but it got cut a little short due to a scheduling conflict on my end. I know I'm going to apologize right now because I have a feeling you're going to want this to continue. But there's good news. Jesse seems to be interested in returning, so if you like this episode, you should let him or I know somehow. We're on all those sites. You know the ones, Twitter, Facebook, etc. You know how they work. Find us, get a hold of us, and we will reply. As I mentioned before, Jesse is more than an author. He has been working on the producing side of music for over a decade now, and he's also known for managing a little band called Man Overboard. Jesse has been through the ringer and back again, which makes him the perfect guest for this show. I want to get to the conversation, but there are a couple of quick things we need to go over first. I assume if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you are a musician, you work with musicians, or you dream of doing one of those two things. Whatever the case, if you want to be taken seriously when promoting new music these days, you need to present your material in a way customized to your brand. That's where Holix comes in. Holix is the music industry's leading digital promotional distribution tool. Their platform makes it easy to create and send beautiful custom promos in minutes. Even better, Holix offers watermarking and anti-piracy tools to ensure your music only reaches the people you intend to hear it. Get your first 30 days of Holix free by visiting Holix.com. That's Haulix.com. Finally, to the music on this week's episode. Jesse doesn't have a band himself, so I figured now would be as good a time as any to plug something I've been listening to as of late. After I finish speaking, you're going to hear a bit of a song called All My Friends Have Changed and I Have Too from the Flat Stanleys out of Baltimore, Maryland. I discovered this duo on Bandcamp just over a week ago, and I have not been able to get enough. They have a couple of EPs out, as well as a killer split that just recently was released. Think the Front Bottoms meets Kimya Dawson during her Juno era, but better. I really think you're going to like it, and who knows, maybe the band will even be on the show one day. That's everything I have for right now. Once again, what you're about to hear is All My Friends Have Changed and I Have Too from the Flat Stanleys. You can find their music wherever you stream songs online. Also, you should pick up Jesse's book, Processing Creativity, which is available from all digital retailers and is currently the #1 title in the songwriting section on Amazon. You don't want to wait to pick up either of these things because both these artists are going to be even bigger in the years ahead. And I really am thankful to have them on the show today. So I'm going to stop yapping, play a little music, and get to the conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the show.
I wrote a letter home to all my friends, but it's a letter that I never sent because I wrote it to the version of my friends that I can tell are dead. It won't be the same when I get back to Baltimore. Oh, would you wake up? 'Cause I've got words and I've got feelings, I've got sentences to make up. There's a place I know where we can go to hide from all the fist fights. And there's a place I know where we can lie down and hope we don't see headlights. But it won't be the same when I get back to Baltimore. You're bleeding and it won't be the same because you'll stay and I'll be wishing you were leaving. I'll see you at Loch Raven, I'll see you with your friends, I'll see your friend group cave in. You'll see it never ends. I'll see you at Loch Raven, I'll see you in your car, I'll see your friend group cave in. You won't get that far. And I will see the friends you used to have before you gave up conversation. And I will be there for you when you need me, and you'll be crying in my basement. And I'll tell jokes, oh I've got jokes, and they will be so fucking funny that you'll forget about your friends and that one time they stole your money.
I am all good, feeling good today. Psyched to do this.
Yeah, well, I had like I know you do a podcast, so you probably know this pain, but
Yes.
like I had a good run where I had like 6 or 7 weeks of just strong, solid shows, and then I had like a week where just everything dropped out, fell apart, and so I like it's been like a week and a half since the last episode came out.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had 3 weeks of cancel because if it's the funny thing is I always say it's like producers, our job is to be responsible, but then you remember, oh, we're in music and they're all totally irresponsible. And so like it's stunning how many cancellations we get for producers on the podcast.
Ugh, I can't. Well, I actually can believe that because I have been working on this charity thing for Everclear for like a month,
Mhm.
2 months now, and I have probably been told I'm about to interview Neil Avron 20 times in those
Oh
2 months.
wow.
Yeah,
It's going to be a rad interview though.
that's his first. That's like his first record, like his first big
Yeah.
record.
I didn't
Um,
think about that. Yeah, that's totally the case because he was like an engineer on a bunch of like Celine Dion stuff first, and then he produced that stuff.
yeah, he did so much for the Afterglow, and things just boom.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really rad. It's a really rad get.
Yeah, well, I really love that Everclear record, and I assume that like
Same.
Art is too busy. He has a serious show, like he doesn't have time for my podcast. So
Mhm.
Neil Avron seems like the next best choice.
Very rad. Very rad.
And I'm glad that you love that band because those records are incredible, all of them.
Yeah, those are great songwriting. I don't love every song on every record, but I really appreciate a lot of what they do.
Yeah, especially the early albums obviously. I mean, that just feels so cliche to be like, well, the early albums though.
Yes, well, I mean, it is that thing. Is as I write about in the book, it gets harder and harder every year.
I know it's that is a great segue into why we're having this conversation. I gotta congratulate you on ranking on #1 on Amazon still.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to watch it rise this fast, and all the press I get in the coming weeks is even bigger. So I'm like really, really, really psyched. Um,
So how does the I saw today that there's only 7 copies of the print version left on Amazon. Like, do you stock that?
so So this is really interesting. So I know you want to talk about the book thing. So I'm going to write like a full article that I'll obviously, even before I send it to you, if you need it, I'll do it. But I've been taking notes on this. I use a company called Lightning Source, which is basically the only competitor to Amazon's own printing thing. So here's a funny thing. When they say that there's only 7 copies left or 8 copies left, it's actually just a lie to entice you to want to have more urgency to buy. They print on demand every day all the books that get ordered. Um, it's just Amazon using scarcity to scare people.
I was so proud of you. I was like, that means he must have like sold X amount of copies.
I mean, it's definitely been what I've seen of the sales. I mean, I got a really nice call like the day before the book came out. Like they were like Barnes and Noble doubled and a half their order. So I'm like, all right, they got that many requests. Yeah, I mean, but really, in all reality, too, you got to remember too is that with Get More Fans, 80% of the sales are digital.
Really?
Yeah. So, and most people I talk to, it's between 60 to 80.
That's so strange to me because I mean, I'll do audiobooks, but just digital books have never been a thing for me.
I do really short books on my iPhone. Like if it's just like something I'm gonna like peruse or like getting better at writing that I can read while I'm waiting for somebody who's late. I'll like read tips type books, but that's the only thing I can do in ebooks.
Yeah, it's just my wife does it. She reads book after book on her phone, and I just don't get it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things. It's like I still like to hold it, and I like to be reminded of the thoughts by seeing it on my bookshelf because I feel like I forget things faster if I don't have them in real form.
Yeah, that's actually I never thought of it that way, but that's absolutely true. And I mean, I know that you collect physical media just in general,
Yes.
and I'm the same way. But I have that like we have a huge film collection, and sometimes people will bring up a movie that I haven't thought of since the day I saw it because I don't ever see it or think about it for that reason. You're right.
That's really interesting. I'm like, it's so funny. I love, I always see you writing about film on Twitter, and I'm a huge film fan, and I don't own anything, and I wonder if I should start doing that. Like, I have some stuff in library for Plex. Like, I keep, like I want to keep Jodorowsky movies around and like my favorites, Lars von Trier stuff. But like,
I really don't keep anything, and now I'm like, huh, maybe that's what I should start doing. Is I should start getting physical film stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't. I had it. I used to, and I sold everything, and then I started buying it again because I got into this thing with writing about film where I had a friend who's really successful in it that told me his style of like becoming a better writer was to start looking at entire filmographies as like from beginning to ends. He started with Steven Spielberg. Started at the beginning,
Hmm.
watch everything through today, and then kind of get to see how the sauce is made, really, like what are the
Yes.
tricks and things. So I kind of became obsessed with that and like Spielberg Easy and stuff, and then I started to do that with actors, and I got to like Walter
Hmm.
Matthau, and I was like, oh, I love Walter Matthau, but most of his movies, they just aren't anywhere anymore. Like you have
Huh.
to own them on DVD or VHS or whatever. So then I was like, all right, well, so then I just, so like a lot of the movies I buy anymore are like classic things or films that like they haven't re-released or they aren't streaming anywhere. So the only way that I can see like Roller Coaster from 1977 is to buy a DVD copy of Roller Coaster from like
That makes
98.
sense. It's funny you talk about that your friend said that. Like I make an argument for that in the book, that like I really think that people need to, one, serialize movies and records in the order they're in, and then two, maintain a state of attentiveness while they do it. Like when I do that stuff, like I will do the thing of like I look at my phone, the pause button must be on,
Yeah, yeah.
and I really take it really, really seriously with like my favorite directors and my favorite records.
I do that too. A big in the music side, a big one for me is like I do this with Bob Seger because I love Bob Seger,
Okay,
but he
we don't
doesn't.
share, we don't share that in
That's
common.
fine. But as an example, like Bob doesn't do streaming. And NPR ran a whole thing on this last week where as
I saw
recently
that.
as 2010, he was doing 600,000 album sales a year still. And he's still, according to like stats, he's still doing like he's still selling. I mean, not maybe like 50K now, like it's dropped hugely, but like
Mhm.
that guy hasn't released like a big record in 30 years, and he's still selling 50K without streaming.
That's fucking nuts.
But like Bob Seger kind of got the ball rolling in my head, and so then I wanted to get into like, I like it. I like experiencing classic music on Spotify. Like the last year, that's been my thing.
Mhm.
You know how it is. You get burnout on everything coming out now because it's like what you work on and talk about. So
Absolutely,
my
absolutely.
escape has been like, I'm going to figure out why people like the Allman Brothers. Um,
Gotcha. I
so
haven't figured that out either.
no, yeah. So I like went back and I started doing that, and like there's just something about being on Spotify and like listening to the first Foghat record where you're like, this isn't why I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. It's like,
Yes,
and
I
and,
understand.
and I struggle a lot with. I just asked somebody this the other day. I was like, what what determines what music we carry with us? Because I realized that most of the music that people talk about still from the last 50 years are released by people that are either still alive or people who lived through that era that are still alive.
Yes.
And we're very quickly going to start reaching a point where a lot of people in the 60s are like, everyone from the 60s is dead, or everyone from the
Hmm.
70s starts to die off, and then it's like, okay, well then who's left to champion those bands and those records, if anyone, because we've never really dealt with that in our history yet.
Well, I mean, I, if you so my father, I'm like, I always joke I'm a second generation hipster, and my
Okay.
father's 72. So when I in 1982, when he'd be going to see like post punk shows or like the Clash, it's like he also had lived through when big band was all that was on the radio when he was growing up. And a lot of people get really uncomfortable with this, but like there's a reason that all the last few years, like while the Grammys are trash, that the rock groups don't win the Grammys. Like every song that's won rock Grammy does is barely had a guitar in it for the past 4 years. And there's like that thing with radio is like, every rock radio thing is becoming a classic rock station because you can only have the bands that could stand up that really tall do that. And people have to face that it really is true that rock has lost a huge segment of it because rock is, if we want to call the Beatles the Advent or Elvis, then so rock's turning 50 or 60 years old, and genres die after about 3 decades,
Yeah.
and that's just a fact. Is like no genre survives it well, and we're gonna have to accept. And like I think the telling thing will be that this is like if hip hop starts to age really badly in 10 years, we're gonna really see it.
Well, I already see it a little bit in like younger generations. I've started to get really annoyed by those like kids react to, because they're starting to react to things that I
Oh yeah.
remember.
Yes, I understand.
And you're like, what do you mean? How does a CD Walkman work? Like, you just like, it just drives me insane. But I've seen where they like, you know, they'll play like Sugar Hill Gang for kids, or you know, Daddy, or like, you know, Kane, and people are like, they don't get it. They think it's silly or stupid because it's like the early origins. So I've started to think about that, but I never put rock in that context. But I guess rock would essentially have to go the way of jazz eventually.
That's exactly what I think it is. And you know, there's even that thing of like I've said this a lot, is like, you know, when everybody's like, who's the next Nirvana? I'm like, it was Skrillex. Get the fuck over it. It happened in 2012. It's old news at this point. And a lot of us, it's so easy for us to burrow down our set of interests these days that we can have our heads in the sand and not even see what's actually really going on out there. And like, as somebody who also listens to dance music, like I'd say I'm like, you know, 60 punk, 40 dance. And like, when you look at the numbers of a streaming of a dance music, like even an obscure underground kind of weird boundary pushing act, it's 10 times the biggest bands in the scene right now that we like interact in. Like literally 10 times the smallest ones. And it's like, it's a very writing on the wall thing that this is going the way of jazz, as you put it.
Well, yeah, I've committed myself in the last year to getting into EDM for this reason, because I have a friend that runs the Intersection in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You know, they're a pretty huge venue in terms of annual ticket sales globally, and their whole business model is essentially EDM with occasional other shows. You know, like they can fill 1,800 people on a Tuesday with an act that I would say 90% of people still wouldn't recognize, for that exact reason, where it's like you wouldn't know them by name, but if you type them into Spotify, their top song has 34 million plays.
Yes, exactly.
And it's kind of fascinating. And from a writing perspective, it's been really hard to adjust, because it's like I've spent a decade writing about rock. I don't know how to write about EDM in a way that's similar. And I find myself, I wonder if that's part of why music blogging has also started to nosedive, because it's kind of founded on, well, what music is 4 people playing instruments.
Yes, and talking about 4 distinct personalities and their interactions with each other, whereas now it's like, oh, well, it's about somebody's interaction with a computer, which is the least interesting thing to write about in the world.
Yeah. There's no it's just like if Mad Men were set today, it wouldn't be that interesting, because there'd just be a whole bunch of guys staring at their computers all day.
I never thought about that. My father's an advertising executive, and I've watched that show through 4 times, and I never thought about like that would probably be the most insufferable show at this point, because it would just be a bunch of bros arguing with each other and swinging their dicks.
Yeah, Don Draper would never come into the office. He'd just be drunk at a desk in his apartment, and that would be the show. They would Skype.
Working remotely and fucking his trainer from the gym.
Yeah. It would be completely just so boring, and I don't think EDM is boring, and so I've kind of been trying to like shove myself into that atmosphere. I went to like this thing called Decadence on New Year's. It's like this giant festival in Denver, and we saw like Tiesto and Marshmello and all those guys, and I just kind of fly on the walled it. But even coming back from it after like 3 nonstop days, I was like, I still don't know how to write about this in a way that's like engaging.
Yeah, I have the weird thing, like obviously, you know, I'm in the heart of Brooklyn culture. I literally, like, you know, I live a dead center in the neighborhood that it all happens. And like, I can't actually do the mainstream dance thing. Like, I like some of them because they're very good at what they do. But like, I think what's actually really interesting is more like, just like how we get into punk bands. Like, you know, like I look through your podcast feed, it's all a lot of very obscure bands to the world that no one knows. It really is that thing of like, I actually find that like the dance people who get the biggest are the most boring. And it's always so interesting to me, because I don't believe that about rock a lot of the time, is that I think the rock has surfaced some of the better personalities, and same with pop. But there's something with dance that, like, you know, it's like you watch a Tiesto or a Steve Angelo interview, and it's like these guys could not be stupider and more uninteresting. Like watching the Swedish House Mafia, that movie that, what's his name, Ridley Scott directed or whatever. It's like the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, listening to them talk.
Yeah. No, I agree, but there is something where it's like if like you said, if a rock person gets there, you assume that it's because they have some like genius wit or something that
Mhm.
is like worth writing about. But in the case of EDM, sometimes you're like, did you just game the system? Like because if you can crack the code, you can get a hit song in a way that
So
doesn't
I
really
so
happen with
so
rock.
I don't actually believe in that crack the code thing. So that's kind of what some of the book's about, is that like I think it is still all about emotions, but I think the emotion in a lot of floor banger dance, as I like to call it, is just so primal that you don't need a lot of intelligence. Whereas to do something new in rock today, you need to be so fluent and understand it on such an interesting scale that you not only need to be fluent, you also have to have some sort of emotional makeup that's totally different than everyone else. Whereas EDM's in this stage where there's still this very primal thing, like kind of like the Chuck Berry Elvis era, where it's like, yes, you don't need to intellectualize it. You can just be this person who feels a certain way. And I think that that's like kind of the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right about the code thing. I think what maybe my problem with at least the biggest EDM acts is I feel like even more so than rock, it seems like they much more quickly kind of settle into this is their sound, and there aren't. Maybe it's because the genre, that whole world is still so young. We haven't been able to see like there isn't someone that seems to be going through prolific evolutions.
Yeah, Porter Robinson is the only one I've seen who like was like, "Cool, I invented a genre. Guess what? I've been releasing these singles that like invented this new genre. My next LP is not even going to be that genre. I'm going to do something totally different because most of them are being opportunistic and are just doing the same thing or just have a micro interest and they found like what they want to do and they just keep doing it because I mean, there is a thing like when I hang out with those people is that like they're studying the dance floor, they're studying the emotional reaction and they are interested in that, but there's a lot of people who don't have that thing that like say like a Brian Eno had where he just gets like he's like, cool, I did that. I'm done. I'm moving on to something else. Like Radiohead's like, we won at guitar rock. Okay, time for Kid A.
Yeah, I
You know, then time to start doing orchestral arrangements.
I guess yeah. There's still a good chance that I'm sure there'll be more coming. It is awfully young as a genre, as
Mhm.
like a movement, I guess more than
Mhm.
anything. Um, well, I like this. I haven't really gotten to go down this EDM rabbit hole with anybody yet because most of the music bloggers I know, they're all rock people. So when you talk about it,
Yes.
they're like, "I hate the Chainsmokers," and you're like, "Yeah, but if you saw the Chainsmokers live, you would get it in a way that you don't now, and even then, you'd still like there's something to it."
There is something to it, and I will fully admit it. As much as like you know, if you asked me the question of like who would I punch in the face in music, I'm like it'd probably be them.
Yeah, probably.
Like
But
there's something about that bro hipster thing from the neighborhood I live in, and I'm just like, yeah, that's my least favorite personality.
I don't know. I like to think that they're like the Smash Mouth of EDM.
All
Where
right, I'm stealing that from you.
if you like if you like
I'm
them,
stealing that from you.
yeah, if you like them before 2016, that was like their Fushu Mang era, like that first
Uh,
Smash Mouth
I,
era.
truth be told, I tell people this all. You know, if there's one thing I get a lot, because like I do work with a lot of dance people, is they're like, well, you know, like how the Chainsmokers came out of nowhere, and then I literally have a screenshot of all the DJ mixes I have from the Chainsmokers from 2013.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, no, they did not come out anywhere. And actually, the strategy they used to get this big was like really interesting. Of that, they were always working with whoever was at the top of hype machine charts for years, and they just finally got good because most of it wasn't good. They always DJ'd good music and did good segs on their sets, but their actual work was fucking trash.
When I saw them for New Year's, most of their set was DJ with a little bit. I was actually impressed at how little they played their big hit songs. It was still mostly like
Huh.
it's mostly 90s and early aughts hip hop, and
Huh.
then they would add like I mean they did like 45 seconds of the Halsey song, like just the hook once
Hmm.
with some CO2 cannons.
Yeah, as you do.
Yeah, if you're an EDM and you don't have CO2 cannons, like what are you doing?
It is true.
I that's really what fascinates me about EDM as live cultures. I feel like as much as people haven't figured out how to write about the artists, the live experience has evolved so much faster than any other genre of music.
Well, there's also more money in it too, so it does
So
make sense.
much.
It's like you think about how low the overhead is to do a bigger thing. It's like it makes it so much easier to invest that money. And like I had a friend who showed me the spreadsheet of the rock band he manages compared to the EDM band, and it was like I no joke like shed a tear for rock.
Oh, I can imagine. It's again to the chain smokers. It's like two guys who just need their laptops.
Yep.
And I mean, those festivals have like one rig.
It really is that thing. It's like it's all set the same. You hook up your video thing. The person hits play in the backstage, does the lights, and that's fucking that.
So I want to talk about this book because I
Yes.
haven't finished it. I haven't finished it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm also not a songwriter, so I mean,
Yes.
meet me in the middle.
I tell everybody after the last book I wrote that I'm like cool, like I don't expect anybody to read this except for people to do it. So anybody who's even read any of it, I'm like I get it. It's a book meant for specific people, and we all take forever to read books. Whereas music, a new song comes out, we hit play in 5 minutes, we're done.
I feel that way about everything I've ever written. Oh, you read one thing? That's more than most. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
like
yes.
one page is still more than 99% of people will ever give me of their time.
Yeah.
All right, so processing creativity. I want to talk about because you and I feel like you and I are similar souls in that we've both read a whole lot of self-help books on creativity.
As we discussed.
Yeah. So where did the idea for the book come from? Because I've read Stephen Pressfield and wanted to write a self-help book too. So like what made you want to do it?
So I initially thought I was going to write kind of more of a lifestyle and more of a philosophy book for musicians. I initially thought I should write a lot of the questions I got, especially like when Zach and I were doing off the record and we do questions. It seemed like a lot of people needed help more in like figuring out how they integrate music into their life since, with the lack of profit and rock being there, it's been way difficult. And I've, as somebody who's getting close to 40, I'm getting very close to I figured out a lot of things. And while I did it, I started reading a lot of the creativity books, like you said, Stephen Pressfield, War of Art. And I read War of Art, and I had a very different reaction than a lot of people, which I can't believe this book sold a lot. It's a piece of shit. I really didn't like it. And then I thought about what my real life's work has been. And so, like I said before, is like my father was an advertising creative director. And I've always seen what I do as a record producer, like, a producer in film allocates budgets, things like that. Whereas, a producer in rock music, we're not, that's barely 1% of what we do, and the manager might even handle it. So I saw that really what I do is I try to figure out how we get the best creative direction. And I'm like, man, I've been writing and doing things about creativity for a long time. And then the more I wrote, I was like, this life philosophy stuff is trash. Throw that out. Let's concentrate on creativity, because most of what I started reading, because I read all these scientific papers and books. I'm like, no one I've ever talked to is, I rapidly listen to podcasts. I read all the interviews, and I'm hearing no one saying most of what I'm here. And if they are saying it, they're not saying it with an understanding of why and the deeper thoughts behind why those things happen. So I'm like, this seems like what I should keep going down the rabbit hole. And also is like natural. Like I wanted to know more about that stuff. And eventually I'm like, I guess I'm writing a book on creativity instead of a more lifestyle book. So, yeah, but the Stephen Pressfield thing, I think, was a lot of the impetus, actually.
It's really hard to not read The War of Art, at least for the first time, and be like, yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't know many people that could get past the first 5 chapters. Once he defines resistance, you're kind of like, oh, yes. I guess, what I'm trying to say is like, that's what really kind of caught my idea about even doing the self-help thing. Cause as soon as I read his definition of resistance, it was kind of crazy how just being able to define something, and you talk about this a lot in the early part of the book, just being able to define what most people are like, that thing, the mysterious ether that we try to pull from, just being able to define it really opens your eyes to like what it is and how you work with it.
Yes, and I think that there is this thing of that. I like to joke that like I'm an epiphany addict, and a lot of these things when you just like you're like I had the same reaction as you. Like when I heard him say resistance, I'm like, all right, that's brilliant. But then I'm like, and really like, that's a 240-page book in a 16-point font with more than half the pages blank. Um, I'm like, okay, this could have been a really good article. I get for marketing, you make it a book, but I'm like, I don't like books like that. I like books that it's like you get a lot of epiphany per page. So that was also a lot of the thing is that I actually saw on my Twitter feed this morning, like somebody ranked books in the most epiphanies per page or like most valuable wisdom per page thing. And I'm like, that's what I want to see. Like, that's what I think books should be. So that book is the opposite. And it had a real strong reaction to me.
So when it came to your book, how did you decide? Because you cover so much stuff in the book and it all flows fairly narrative. Like it almost flows like a narrative as much as nonfiction can.
Yes.
How did you go about kind of organizing your thoughts to get started? I mean, I know you did the other book, but it was like 700 pages, and that felt much more like a whole bunch of different ideas in one kind of binder of a book.
Mm-hmm.
Where this is more like you kind of want to read from beginning to end. You could pick it up and put it down, but if you go from beginning to end, you kind of build and build and build.
Yeah, like the Get More Fans, I always say, is like people should read the first two chapters and then just read the chapter of what they're working on at the time and read it 15 pages at a time as you want to do a task. But this, I do think that this one is best to read most of the way through. I do think there could be some skipping around, but the way I came about it is when I've actually written 3 books, but I didn't release one because I didn't think it needed to be in the world. I just take notes extensively. So this book is a 260-ish page book. And when I went, okay, like the writing part of this is done, it's time to edit, I was on 575 pages. And after my last book being 750 pages and seeing how much that intimidated people, I said, okay, that's got to go. And I know we say a lot of this repeatedly. Let's trim it down, trim it down, trim it down. But really, I try to just figure out the categories and I usually just have a Google Doc where I'm like, all right, this is in this idea. And then I figure out how it all goes. And then eventually I feel happy with that. It's like, okay, these are the sections. But truth be told, I was changing those sections probably up to the last days before I sent out promo copies.
So what was the Lost book? You can't just gloss over a Lost book.
I wrote a book on making modern recordings, and I think it changes so fast it doesn't lend itself to that. With that said, some of the ideas are in it. The other big thing with it is I wrote almost exclusively on a BlackBerry on on subway and bus rides. So to go through those notes was also such hell that I was like, by the time I had gotten it to like a first draft and like letting somebody read it, I was so embarrassed of it. I was like, I don't want to keep working on this. I have better thoughts in my head. And the idea for Get More Fans was more pressing. So it's like, maybe this book will be the next book. And then it didn't end up being the next book. And I don't think it's ever going to end up being any book. So
that's fine. Most screenplays are unproduced.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And I mean, most song ideas don't, come out. So the idea that a book, it's fine. You can finish a book and not release it. Maybe, like you said, maybe that's for the best.
Yes, and in this book, I highly argue that most songs should never even get past their skeletal form.
Now, do you think this age of like ease of uploading and such has really harmed that theory of thinking? Because I feel like most artists now are like quantity over quality seems to be a growing trend again.
So I actually embrace both sides of this. So obviously, my other part of my background is I managed Man Overboard, and we did 70 songs, I think, in 30 months. So on one side, it's very easy to go, ooh, quantity. But on the other side, when you looked at the way fans reacted to it, and I could see all the analytics, it was stunning to see how many people really appreciated that. Like, I really like that idea of like, music journalist nerdery of like, this is canon. And the idea that you put out a lot of material, but then decide what's your greater artistic statement, I think is a great thing while still feeding fans and keeping them excited. I think that's a beautiful thing that we can do these days. I have no problem with it because it's so easy that if you're just a mid-level fan, to just go, I'm not going to pay attention to every single remix, cover song, etc. that they do. I'm just going to wait for the LPs. Or if you're a big fan, you can go dive in and go deep. I've always loved the bands that have done that throughout time.
I would agree. I think that, see, I always feel like Man Overboard is one of these exceptions because the quality was there regardless, but they put out songs in a quantity that also fit what I felt was like a narrative. So with Man Overboard, I felt that was a band that the songs doubled as almost like a book in its own form, where like you felt like you were on a journey with these people and it kind of carried on to each subsequent release. You want to know what the next chapter in the story is, much like a podcast or anything else. But I feel like a lot of bands today never get to having a narrative. It just ends up being a collection of songs. Or the worst is hip hop, because hip hop has always kind of been plagued by like quantity over quality. Just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. But I see it happening more and more now with young acts, just because they have the ability to record. They're like, here's 15 ideas. I actually know a band who we're putting in the next issue of Substream, where I think their first real release is a full length 12 song album. So I was like, come on, guys. You don't have 12 songs. Like, it's just, you don't like, and even if you have 12 songs, you don't have the interest in what you're doing yet, where I think 12 songs is justified.
Yeah, and I think there is a secret behind this, and I really appreciate those kind words about the Man Overboard thing, because that shows you got what we were going for, and it worked. So I'm really psyched on that. But the other side of it is when they came to me with their first demos, they brought me 38 songs for the first 5-song EP, and yeah, we developed a lot of those 38 songs into songs, but there was still 40 songs on the cutting room floor of those 70. And, I talk a lot about Rick Rubin's method in the book, where he's very staunch that you basically have to have fully formed, for a 12-song album, you have to have 36 songs. You're going to record 24, then another 6 of them are going to hit the floor. Then you have 6 B-sides and a 12-song record. When Black Sabbath didn't want to do that much, he made them put out an 8-song record.
See, and I don't hate a 9-song record. I remember
I don't either.
There was a 9-song Atreyu record right after The Curse, and it made better sense than what they ended up doing. Like, it worked for what they were doing at the time. After what was arguably their largest release. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember a story I always tell people when I do these. I know you do conferences too, and you make these things where people ask you the same 5 questions. But I always do the write a ton of songs. I use the Rick Rubin story as well, but I remember when AFI did December Underground, they had 100 demos that end up becoming December Underground, and that blew my mind at the time, because I had also read a story about how Sum 41 had written Chuck and done 13 songs, and 12 of them made the record.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we don't know, like the unseen part of it all is like, you don't know if they were sitting there and they just didn't bring all of them to the band, or like, let's also remember Chuck, that's the one the manager produced instead of Jerry Finn. And he could have been sitting there discussing which demos and helping like when whoever came up with the good idea, he could have been like, that's the good idea, keep working on that and don't do that. And they could have been nipping it in the bud before they ever got to be demos. Like, it's hard to ever know where these people were in their thing, but I know one thing is, like, I've been making records for 90 years. And actually, it's funny you talk about that December Underground thing, because when I used to work for Ross Robinson, we were in talks to do that record with them. And I remember that thing of, like, I want to actually say that they said they had even more than that. And we were like, oh, God, we're never going to be able to listen to 100 demos.
Yeah. But I'm glad. I love that you have these deep pulls of knowing who the producers are for these records.
Yes. That is my superpower, is that, and knowing the senator for every state in America.
That's a solid superpower. Mine's the capital of every state, and then all of alternative Christian music, 95 to 2005.
Well done.
Even more useless, but fun nonetheless. Listen, that's a genre that came and went way faster than 3 decades.
This is true.
Yeah. Story for another time. So, what going into writing this book? I guess my first question from somebody that's trying to do something similar for the music industry is like, what was your biggest obstacle in doing this? I mean, because part of me feels like the greatest obstacle I face is just feeling that I have the confidence / authority to be like, I'm the guy who should tell you how to do this.
So I do have a confidence that a lot of people have instilled in me, that I know how to tell people about bigger ideas in a way that somebody who doesn't understand them can get them. And I think a lot of that is being just a fucking nerd who works with musicians who don't give a fuck about learning. And having to explain things to them all day, and I've been doing that for so long. But the greatest obstacle, I mean, I actually write about a lot of the obstacles in the book, but like, you know, some of the hardest things is just working into a life. Like every musician these days that isn't popular has to deal with a day job most of the time. And like, I still had to produce records. I have noise creators where I do a ton of coding work and I do a ton of podcasts and other things. And I try to have a life. That didn't work out so well during a lot of the making of this record, the making of this book. But like, I'm producing, mixing, and mastering records. Like, I still, in the year that I was going hard on this, I still worked on like 200 records last year. And figuring out that I had to do things, I can't write at the end of the day after I've been having all this option paralysis and ego depletion of producing, mixing, and mastering records all day. I figured out that what I had to do is like I had to figure out efficiently how I go to work, 3 to 4 days of work, and do the record production, and then do like a 16-hour day, then sleep in 8 to 10 hours the next day, get myself healthy, get a good breakfast, and then work on the book for as long as I could each day, and then figure out what I could do. Is like I usually could only do 5 hours of good writing each day and turn off the Twitter, and then the rest of the day I could spend like reading, doing research, touching up some grammar things, working on the other ideas. But like having to figure out all that was like, I'm real glad it's over.
Yeah. So what was your method for writing then? Was it I have to do it at the beginning of the day, or like set time aside on the weekends? When did you actually write this thing?
Uh, so it was weekdays and weekends because of my job. Those don't really mean anything. I could do, like, today's my day off actually, and it's Wednesday when we're taping this, and I'll work all through the weekend. Like, I have a new project with the guys from Somos that they start on Thursday at 10 p.m. and then we work till Sunday at 10 p.m. And it's like, it's always chaotic. But I'm also the weird person that my good in times where my brain works well is about 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. So it basically means like my social life gets cut off from that because I have to value that the most. And I also can't really do much in the morning. So in the morning, it's like I'll do all the emails and all my obligations and go shopping and all that stuff. And just learning that about yourself is so much of the thing. Is like, I've always known this about me, that I should do the dumbest work in the early morning or the very end of the night for me. And learning that as a record producer, it means like a lot of time mixing records is a lot of clerical work, like literally data entry, a lot of it, and just organizing. And I've learned that I should do that at the end of the day when my ears are shot, or the early morning when I'm not feeling particularly creative and I'm not going to get into flow states as easy.
Oh, flow states, man!
Oh.
You've done your reading.
No, yes. So there's a whole chapter on that in there.
I believe in them. I know that there are flow state naysayers, but I do believe it's a thing.
Anybody who's a flow state naysayer hasn't done the work to get their mind there. And I say this as somebody who had to work very hard to get them. I was always self-diagnosed ADD, and it wasn't true when I learned how to concentrate. And like, I also say it, it's like, a lot of working on music is almost like learning to meditate, is that you have to learn an extended concentration on one singular thought and attention. And it's that thing. It's like when you start to learn how to do that those flow states are real, and it's totally a thing. Now, there is an argument, like I think Stephen Kotler talks about it, that a lot of people who are on the spectrum are not able to achieve flow states as easy. But then they also say that there's other parts of the spectrum that you achieve them even easier than other people, that you're kind of almost always in a flow state.
I think I'm part of the more difficult crowd. I'm in a flow state the first few hours of the day. Like, my thing is, like, I feel like I can get into the flow state as long as I learn to not pick up my phone when I first wake up. Like, I have to do it right in the morning. Like, if I want to be creative, the thing where it's like writing, the Holics blog, or doing things that are kind of like what I've made into work, like you with production, probably to some extent, like that is kind of like just a skill that I turn on and off. But to really write, to do something new or to evolve that skill, I have to like make sure that I haven't taken in something else. Because I read once about the effect of how your brain has to kind of switch gears when you start looking at your phone in the morning. It has to start processing information, and I try to resist processing anything that's unfamiliar as long as possible in the morning, and just work. until I start pulling stuff up. Because once I start processing stuff, then my brain's everywhere else.
Yeah, I've gotten really good at I kind of call it like the vacuum time with my head, is that like everything that's going to trouble me, I get out of my head. I mean, I'm also really good with like a lot of like stoic philosophies of like calming myself down and doing it, getting it out of my head and being like, okay, this is not going to matter if you do this in 1 hour or 5 days. Literally does not matter. It will have no consequences. Let's do this. And I get in a good headspace. But like, this is all stuff that like, I think a lot of people who like naysay it just like really like they're just so used to operating at a terrible level that they just don't believe in it. And you don't see that enhanced work on your creative work really does reap huge benefits.
Yeah, scheduling was probably one of it's dumb to me how much time of my life I didn't spend like having a daily schedule. It's those little building blocks, right? Like that's ultimately what leads you to be able to do the flow states and all that stuff. It's like as simple as like knowing what I'm going to do the next day, as opposed to just sitting down and being like, well, work.
Yes. And I definitely believe, I always joke that I'm a really chaotic person who's been a reluctant planner, and I now like so thoroughly believe in like planning things because I've seen how much it helped me, despite it not particularly contributing to the greatest amount of happiness in my life. It does contribute to better work and being happier with my work, which I think makes me a lot happier.
Yeah, no, I find myself way happier. I didn't realize how much my like I don't know what the word would be, laziness / like depression over, because I mean you're a guy that works by yourself a lot of the time, I assume.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I mean the majority of my life is spent been alone in a windowless room.
Yeah, I only recently got an office with windows in like the last 12 months, and we moved to Minnesota, so like most of the year I can't be in there anyways because ice. It's just way too cool.
Yes.
So I've only recently been able to really settle into the office space, and I'm that way where it's like if I don't have something like if I don't have my schedule and I don't have myself on the right track, I find myself getting like real bummed out real easily because I just am like just awash, and lost in the industry. And you're like, because you're by yourself, you really don't have that tether of like, if you work at a record label and you go to the office every day, there's like 7 other people there who are also trying to make it happen. And when you find yourself in that like isolated room, you're like, yeah, but if I just don't do it, who's gonna notice today?
Oh, and like trust me when I say it. Like it's like I have friends who like tease me. They're like, dude, it's like 2 p.m. and you tweet about the newest episode of Mr. Robot. I'm like, well, sometimes that's the scheduled tweet, but the good about it is I just go, yeah, I'm a little burnt out. It's time to kick back for a little while at 2 p.m. And knowing I can do that for some of the work is the best thing that also gets me great work.
It's true. My boss at Holics, I make this joke anytime someone asks me what it's like to work at Holics, but I'm always like, Matt goes to the gym from noon to like 2:30 every day, on like clockwork, and he goes because no one else is there. And I'm like, so that's what it's like to work at like in the middle of the day. That's a normal thing that he's like, I gotta go to the gym and just like work this out so I can sit back down and function in the middle of the day. And it's one of those what do you call it? One of those niceties that I guess that we are afforded in our positions.
It is true.
So I know you get into this in the book, but maybe as like a free little sample to people, for people that aren't in that position, because this is what I get the most often when people ask me about how to get into the professional side of music, is like, how do I do that while, keeping a roof over my head? And you have a whole section in the book about this, but could you kind of shine some light on what you tell people?
I think people don't reverse engineer their lives about what's going to be nurturing to them a lot. I was out with a good friend of mine doing this last night. And so for me, the other thing is like genetically, like my parents are the same, is that like we need abnormal amounts of sleep to be functional human beings in my family. And because of that, like I have to do the thing like, dude, I am a partying, drinking type of guy who lives in the heart of Brooklyn, and I have to go, cool, I have to be up at 9 a.m. That means I'm home by 12:30 because it takes 30 minutes to wind down and for melatonin to kick in. And for other people, it's like, like I said, like I do a 16-hour day at my job because I know if I do one mix during the day, I'm not going to be able to write it at night because that depletes all of my creativity and the momentum I have. And I've tried to get around it so many times, but I've engineered my life around this. And so many people need to quit their jobs, change their jobs or change the way they delegate their sleep, their nutrition. Like so many people, like I know there's nothing more boring than listening to a hipster from Brooklyn talk about nutrition, but like, you know, I never would have written Get More Fans without Red Bull. And with this record, it's like knowing how to do like coffee and matcha. Like it was like I discovered like my brain's a lot better on that stuff, and it's like way more measured. Whereas like when I was drinking Red Bull, it's like I have 1 good hour, and now it's like I can get 5 good hours. And like learning how to find those patterns and then find a job that like works for you. Like you're talking about how you are really good at creating in the morning. It's like if you have a job that makes you get up at 5, that means you're gonna have to get up at 4, which means you're never going to concerts anymore and you're not gonna be able to play in a band. And so like figuring out when you do that. And then I also talk a lot about like using the science of habits. And this is so many people are like, oh, I can't get into the habit. I can't do that all the time. I'm like, it's so hard for me to get in. It's like, well, you're not using any of the scientific things about how to get into habits. Like there's true science that works on it. Like like I said, I've been a chaotic person all my life. And now that I like know how to get into habits, I'm like, man, my life is so much easier. Like quitting, like I'm the skinniest I've been in years because I actually learned how to do habits and exercise for once. Like the way I exercise is when I hit print on a mix, I do sit-ups and push-ups and pull-ups because I've never had a way where I could be like, okay, when I do this thing, you do that thing. Because like going to the gym is just never going to happen for me. I'm too busy. Learning all those things about yourself and figuring out the science of how you do that, that's how you get those things done. And so many people feel helpless about that when they just need to learn a few simple things that make it super, super easy.
Little steps all over again.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right, man. Well, I can't keep you much longer. I want to, but I have to. I'm interviewing Skylar from He Is Legend today as well.
Oh, nice. Very cool. I'm a big fan of that I Am Hollywood record.
Yeah, I am too. I think the problem is that most people don't realize He Is Legend released 4 more albums.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah, well, they're one of those bands, and I'm going to talk to him about this, so teaser for when I get to that episode of the podcast. They're one of those bands that, like, did 2 albums, went away for 4 years, came back, did an album, went away for 2 years, came back, did an album, went away for a few years, came back. And they don't really exist in the same arena as, I guess, most alt-rock bands. They're just kind of like, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by those bands that can, like, pick it up, tour for 18 months, then just put it down, come back in 2 years, do it again.
That is really strange. I haven't thought about that much.
Yeah, there's not a lot of bands that do it, but it's becoming more of a thing with those legacy acts that maybe that they were never, huge, but they have a decent enough fervent following. And in the age of streaming, I guess it's a lot easier to kind of harness that and keep it going.
And they disappear long enough that people are hungry for them again.
Yeah. And
that's a huge thing.
They might even, make time to listen to the new album. They were gone so long, which is,
yes,
a problem. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but yes. I do want people to buy your book. So what's the easiest place to get it? I mean, is Amazon what benefits you the most, or is there like a direct method?
There is a direct method. The book's website is processingcreativitybook.com. It has all the options for all the different book formats that you can buy it on. Amazon tends to be the easiest thing. Honestly, with this book, unlike my last book, I'm compensated about the same for every way anybody would buy it. So make yourself happy, do your own thing, whatever works for you.
Well, that's a solid enough answer. And I'm going to have you back on the show because we didn't even get to picking up all the things that I'm trying to write about, but I am going to have to pick your brain for it because I'm interested in all the interviews and everything.
We should definitely talk. Obviously it's very easy for us. So
yeah, obviously, yeah. So I want to do what you did just for the professional side of things, which like songwriting hasn't been done. Like the fact that your book hadn't really been done before blew my mind. Just like the fact that this idea that I have is like people just don't do it. It's weird. Maybe it's because the niche didn't seem like it was big enough before.
I think there's also just this thing that a lot of people say they're going to do this, but they don't have the inertia to actually really want to do that. I think it takes there's somebody told me a really interesting thing the other day that like the thing a lot of people miss is that there's usually some sort of seed that you're like, I need to do this for my own self-image. I've known I needed to be an author since I was about 8 or 9 years old. And everything I knew I needed to be since I was young. Those are the things I've done. Like I have a side business where I fix restaurant sound systems. 'Cause I always wanted to have a restaurant. I always wanted to be a record producer. I always wanted to be an author. All the boxes are checked. Now I don't know what I do.
No, exactly. That is precisely it, almost in a perfect nutshell.
Yes.
Actually, I'll tell you real quick anecdote. The thing that really broke, well, I've been talking about this book for a while, and I had like an outline for it and everything for a bit, but I went to the worst music conference of my life recently, and I mean they got my name wrong, like on the placard. I worked for Holic. And I was just like, oh, it was so bad. And I sat down on my panel for marketing and branding, and it was me who could be like, Holic sources, Chance the Rapper, Metallica, all this stuff. And then two people from two different local ad agencies, and I was in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. So they were just like the one person's claim.
Was this launch?
No, it's not launch. It's called Millennium Music Conference. I don't mind putting them on blast because they didn't pay me. But
I heard of this, yeah.
Yeah, so I sat with those two local ad managers and a social media manager for a burlesque company. And I sat on this panel, and every single question I ended up by the end of it just leaning into the microphone and being, don't do that. Whatever you do. Because like people would be like, so where should I be on social media? And they would chime in and be like, I believe every artist is a company, and every company should be on every social media site that exists. And I was just like, please don't do that. Like, please profusely don't do those things. So by the time I left, I was like, nah, this isn't worth it, because people pay like $200 to be here. I can write a book that does this for $20 and save everyone time.
And you're making podcasts and content. You're always writing cool things that I see, and it's like, truth be told, that is what it makes all those things a little bit more monetizable while helping the world. Like, your idea is a great idea that will help the world, so it's awesome.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. All right, I gotta hop on the phone with Skylar, but we will be together again soon. If we have to make it monthly, we can. We'll just teach everyone our information.
Sounds good. I really enjoyed this conversation, so I really appreciate it, man.
No problem. Last thing, is there going to be an audio version?
It comes out in about 5 days. I'm literally got Amazon rejected the cover. So I'm working on fixing the cover this afternoon. But
and it's your voice?
It is sadly my voice.
Next time we're going to talk about what it's like to have to read your own writing for that long.
Yes, I have a lot of things to say about that since it's very fresh on my mind.
All right, man. You have a great day.
You too. Great to talk to you.
Yep. Bye.